Air in the grand hall was thick enough to choke on, scented with beeswax from 1,000 candles and the cloying sweetness of winter roses. It clung to the gilded ceiling, dripped down the marble columns, and pooled around Eden's feet like a phantom tide. From her throne beside the Alpha King, she watched the shimmer of it all, the jewels on powdered throats, the practiced smiles, the flash of polished silver. It was a perfect, suffocating performance of loyalty and power. And at its center, she was the most perfect, most suffocating prop of all. The bond, that silken cord tethering her soul to his, hummed placidly beneath her skin, a low, constant vibration that was supposed to feel like safety. Tonight, it felt like the bars of a cage. She had been standing, no, reigning, at his side for nearly an hour, a statue carved from porcelain and draped in royal blue silk. Kellen, her mate, the Alpha King of the Consolidated Northern Territories, was a masterpiece of control. His voice was a smooth, resonant baritone that never frayed with anger or trembled with passion. It moved over the assembled alphas and their chosen mates with the cool, inexorable force of a glacier. His hand rested on the small of her back, a proprietary weight that communicated nothing but ownership. It was not warm. It had not been warm for years. The realization had been a slow, creeping frost, numbing her from the inside out. The bond didn't care. It didn't register the chill. The bond only cared that the king was steady. The trade routes through the Rim-Aspire territory remained secure, Kellen was saying, his words directed at Alpha Marcus of the Stonecrest Pack, a man whose weathered face held the stoic patience of mountains. The tithes have been met. Their loyalty is sufficient. The word hung in the air, sufficient. It was a king's word, dismissive and final. It was the same word Eden felt described her own existence. She was a sufficient queen. She produced no heirs. The bond that was meant to be a bridge for life had proven a barren dam. But her serene presence calmed the court. Her quiet grace was a reflection of his own impeccable control. She was an asset, a beautiful, silent testament to his stability. She risked a glance at him. His profile was flawless, cut from pale granite. Silver threaded his dark hair at the temples, a distinguished touch that made the younger pack members look upon him with even greater reverence. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the crowd, assessing, calculating, missing nothing. Except for her. He could stand this close, his thumb brushing the silk over her spine, and see straight through her. The bond told him she was there. It told him she was calm. It required nothing more. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. A younger Eden, barely 18, breathless with the sheer force of the mating bond snapping into place. The dizzying, overwhelming feeling of being truly seen. Kellen had looked at her then, his gaze a physical touch that set every nerve alight. He had whispered promises of a shared reign, a partnership forged in the heart of the pack. She had trusted the feeling. She had trusted the bond. She had mistaken the initial fire of possession for the enduring warmth of love. But a fire that isn't fed eventually starves. Now, all that remained were cold ashes and the hollow echo of a promise he likely didn't even remember making. She forced her focus back to the room, her own smile a fragile mask. Her gaze drifted over the faces in the crowd. She saw Alpha Briseis of the Sunwood Pack, her hand linked with her mate's, their shared glance so full of private meaning it was a world unto itself. She saw the new couple from the Riverbend Pack, the young female Alpha blushing as her chosen mate whispered something in her ear, his breath stirring her hair. Everywhere she looked, she saw reflections of what she was supposed to have. Tiny, intimate gestures, shared glances, the subtle lean of one body into another. Real bonds, messy and alive, not the sterile, perfect hum that vibrated inside her. The hollowness in her chest ached. She blamed herself for so long. She wasn't strong enough, not fiery enough. She had tried to be what he needed, placid, elegant, an extension of his will. She had silenced the wild, hopeful girl she used to be, burying her under layers of etiquette and duty. She had shrunk herself down to nothing, hoping that if she took up less space, he might finally notice the void she left behind. But he hadn't. Her disappearance had been too convenient for him. The great oak doors at the far end of the hall groaned open. A sudden hush fell over the room, a wave of silence that was heavier and more profound than the polite quiet that had preceded it. Even Kellen paused mid-sentence. his head turning. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable. The air, once stale with perfume and candle wax, was suddenly charged, prickled with the scent of ozone and something wilder, pine needles crushed underfoot after a storm. Wet, dark earth, old stone. It was a scent of the untamed world beyond their manicured borders, and it was rolling into the hall like a thunderhead. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, so large he seemed to consume the light. He was not dressed for court. He wore dark functional leathers, worn and scarred from travel, not the silks and velvets of the other alphas. As he stepped forward into the candlelight, whispers erupted like startled birds. Eden could feel the vibrations of fear, of awe, of pure, unadulterated shock through the floorboards. It was him, the wolf of the north, the alpha of the Shadowfen pack, a man spoken of only in hushed, fearful tones, Ronan Rhymespire. His territory bordered Kellen's, a wild, untamable expanse of shadow and mountain that had never truly bent the knee. He paid his tithes, but he did not attend court. He did not play their political games. He was a myth, a boogeyman the other alphas used to scare their pups. And he was here. He moved with a predatory grace that was utterly at odds with the stiff formality of the room. Every head turned to follow him. Scars mapped his face, one trailing from his temple down his jaw, another puckering the skin above a dark, formidable brow. His hair was black as a raven's wing, long and unbound, and his eyes. When his gaze swept the room, Eden felt the air leave her lungs. They were the color of molten gold, feral and ancient, holding a fire she hadn't seen in a man's eyes in a decade. For the first time in years, something inside her stirred. It was not her own feeling. It was the deep primal part of her, the wolf she thought had been lulled into a permanent sleep by the bond's sterile hum. It lifted its head, sniffing the air, its hackles raising not in fear, but in recognition. The scent of him was a shock to her system, a jolt of lightning to a dormant heart. Kellen's hand tightened on her back. The pressure a sharp, immediate warning. A command, be still, be silent, be mine. She felt the bond react, attempting to soothe the disturbance, to plaster over the crack that had just appeared in her perfect, placid composure. It sent a wave of calm through her, but for the first time, it felt artificial, an imposition. She fought it, holding on to the raw, shocking feeling Ronan Rhymespire's presence had ignited. He ignored the other alphas. He walked past them as if they were trees in his forest, his golden eyes fixed on the dais, on the throne, on the king. He stopped a respectful but defiant distance away, the scent of the wild clinging to him like a shroud. The entire hall held its breath. Alpha King Kellen, Ronan's voice was a low growl, the sound of rocks grinding together. It was a voice that knew how to command, not to persuade. An unexpected pleasure, Kellen replied, his own voice impossibly smooth, a layer of ice over a turbulent sea. The king's smile didn't touch his eyes. We were not aware you would be gracing us with your presence, Alpha Rhymespire. My presence is not a grace, Ronan stated, the words blunt and without apology. It is a necessity. Your hunters crossed my borders. They took what was not theirs. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a direct accusation, an unthinkable challenge. Kellen's fingers dug into Eden's back, nearly bruising. Through the bond, she felt a flicker of his true emotion, not anger, but the cold, sharp irritation of a flawless plan being disrupted. My hunters are disciplined, Kellen said, his voice dropping a degree, losing its superficial warmth. If they crossed your borders, it was a mistake, one for which reparations will be made. Ronan Rhymespire's lips twisted in a humorless smirk. They were not mistaken. They were following the scent of a silver wolf. A wolf they have been tracking for weeks. A wolf from my pack. His gaze flickered from Kellen, and for a heart-stopping second, it landed on Eden. The world narrowed to the space between them. The gold in his eyes seemed to burn hotter, and in their depths, she saw not the reflection of a queen on her throne, but something else. He saw the cage. He saw the ghost. He looked at her as if he could see the slow, methodical erosion of her soul. No one had ever looked at her like that. The dormant wolf inside her whimpered, a sound of profound, aching loneliness. The bond with Kellen surged, a desperate, cloying attempt to pull her back under, to smooth the waters, to reassert control. He is nothing, a savage. You are mine. You are calm. You are content. But she wasn't. For the first time, she felt the bond not as a connection, but as a chain. And this wild man from the north, this storm of an alpha, had just shown her the lock. Ronan held her gaze for a moment longer before turning back to Kellen, his expression hardening into granite. The silver wolf they were hunting was not just any wolf. She was my sister. The word landed with the force of a physical blow. And your hunters have killed her. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the frantic, terrified beating of Eden's own heart. The gilded room, the perfect court, the flawless king, it all felt like a fragile porcelain shell. And Ronan Rhymespire had just struck it with a hammer. His gaze moved back to her, deliberate and piercing, and his voice dropped. A low rumble meant only for her, though the whole room heard it. They said the Alpha King kept a ghost for a mate. I see they were wrong. He took one slow, deliberate step closer, his golden eyes locking onto hers, stripping away every lie she had ever told herself. He keeps a prisoner. For a terrible, endless moment, the world ceased to spin. The flicker of 100 candles froze, the scent of roses turned to ash in Eden's nostrils, and the only sound was the frantic drumming of her own blood in her ears. Ronan Rhymespire's golden eyes were still on her, twin embers in the vast, cold hall, and they did not accuse. They stated a fact. Then Kellen moved. It was not a sudden jerk, but a fluid, controlled shift of weight. The fingers on her back, which had felt like talons, gentled into a possessive caress. He drew her fractionally closer to his side, a silent reassertion of ownership. Through the bond, a wave of pure glacial fury washed over her, so cold it burned. But on the surface, he was the picture of regal calm. Alpha Rhymespire, Kellen's voice was smooth as polished marble, devoid of any crack or tremor. Grief has clearly disordered your senses. You trespass in my hall, you levy baseless accusations, and now you insult my queen. He let the title hang in the air, a shield and a warning. You will leave now. We will discuss the matter of your sister and my hunter's alleged transgression at a time when you are capable of rational discourse. It was a masterful dismissal. It painted Ronan as an unhinged savage and Kellen as the magnanimous, patient ruler. The assembled alphas began to breathe again, their loyalty snapping back into place, their gazes shifting from Ronan with pity and scorn. But Ronan did not move. His massive frame was utterly still, an unshakable mountain against a rising tide. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so primal it vibrated through the floor and up Eden's spine. Her dormant wolf, the one she hadn't felt in years, flattened its ears in a mix of terror and exhilarating recognition. This was the language of the wild, a language this gilded court had forgotten. Your hunters left a trail a pup could follow, Ronan said, his voice dangerously soft. They wore your king's sigil, they carried silver-tipped arrows, and they were led by your spy master, a man who does not move without your express command. This was no mistake. It was an execution, and you will answer for it. He took a step back, pulling the room's focus with him. His gaze swept over the other alphas, contempt clear on his scarred face. You sit here in your silks and your lies, content to be leashed by a king who hunts the children of your own kind in secret. You call it order. I call it rot. Then his eyes found Eden one last time. The inferno in them softened for a split second, replaced by something that looked unnervingly like pity. A cage is still a cage, he murmured, the words meant for her alone, no matter how beautifully gilded. With that, he turned, his worn leather cloak swirling around him, and walked out of the grand hall. He did not storm out. He did not flee. He simply left, taking the storm with him, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more damning than his accusations. The great oak doors boomed shut behind him. Kellen waited a beat, then two, letting the tension settle. He raised a hand, his smile returning, a perfect, bloodless curve of his lips. My apologies for the interruption. It seems the wilderness breeds a certain lack of decorum. Please continue. The music swelled, hesitant at first, then more confident. The nobles began to murmur, the carefully constructed illusion of peace and power stitching itself back together. But it was a fragile tapestry now, and everyone in the room could see the gaping hole Ronan Rhymespire had torn in it. Kellen leaned close, his breath a cold puff of air against her ear. "Smile, my dear, the court is watching." The bond pulsed with the command, a silken, irresistible pressure to obey. Her facial muscles complied before her mind did, her lips pulling into the serene, empty smile she had perfected over the years. But inside, something had broken free. "Prisoner. A cage is still a cage." The words echoed, refusing to be silenced. The rest of the evening was a blur. Eden stood, smiled and nodded, a perfect automaton. She felt the eyes of the court on her, their gazes filled with a new, speculative curiosity. Did they see the bars of her cage now, too? Or did they just see a madman's ravings and a queen's impeccable composure? When the last guest had finally departed, Kellen guided her from the hall, his hand still firmly on her back. They walked in silence through the cavernous, echoing corridors, the tapestries depicting great battles and royal lineages seeming to mock her with their grandeur. He did not release her until they were inside the royal chambers, the heavy door clicking shut behind them with a sound of absolute finality. The moment the lock engaged, the polite facade dissolved. He released her so abruptly, she stumbled. The bond, which had been a placid hum, became a vice. His rage, no longer needing to be contained, flooded their connection. It wasn't hot and messy like Ronan's had been. It was a razor-sharp, Arctic cold that sought to freeze her from the inside out. "What was that?" he asked, his voice lethally quiet. He began to pace, his movements precise and predatory. Eden wrapped her arms around herself, the silk of her gown suddenly feeling as thin as ice. I did nothing." He stopped, turning to face her. In the lamplight, his handsome features were twisted into a mask of cold fury. "You did nothing? You stood there and let that mongrel look at you. You let him speak to you? I felt it, Eden, through the bond. You were intrigued." The word was an accusation of the highest treason. "He murdered my guards at the border to get in here. He challenged my authority in front of every significant alpha in the territories, and you were intrigued." "He said you killed his sister," she whispered, the words tasting like glass in her mouth. Kellen's laugh was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "He said many things. He is a barbarian trying to sow discord. His sister was a rogue, a troublemaker. She got what she deserved." His dismissal was so casual, so complete, it stole her breath. He spoke of a life as if it were an inconvenience he'd swept aside. "And what of what he said about me?" she dared, her voice trembling but resolute. He moved toward her, his shadow swallowing her whole. He reached out, not to strike her, but to cup her chin, his fingers cold against her skin. He tilted her head up, forcing her to meet his winter sky eyes. "He said you were a prisoner, a foolish romantic notion. You are a queen, Eden. You have everything a female could ever want. Gowns, jewels, a palace, my protection." He paused, his thumb stroking her jaw in a gesture that was meant to be soothing but felt like a threat. "Do not mistake your comfort for a cage. It is a privilege, one that can be revoked." The bond tightened, a suffocating pressure around her heart, her lungs, her very soul. It was a physical manifestation of his will, forcing her own emotions down, smothering the spark of rebellion, demanding submission. "You are mine. You are safe here. He is a threat." Forget his words. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She had fought this pressure before, in small, insignificant ways. But now, with Ronan's words echoing in her mind, she fought it with a desperation she hadn't felt in years. She pushed against the psychic weight, trying to hold on to the raw, jagged truth of her own feelings. "You are overwrought," Kellen said, sensing her struggle. He mistook it for feminine hysterics. "The stress of the evening. Go to your rooms, rest." He released her and turned away, dismissing her as easily as he had dismissed a wolf's life. He went to his desk, pulling out a sheaf of papers, his focus already shifted to matters of state, the emotional turmoil he had inflicted on her already forgotten. She was a tool to be used, a problem to be managed, and now a disturbance to be put away. Eden fled. She didn't walk, she fled to the adjoining door that led to her own separate chambers. A concession to her delicate nature, he'd called it years ago, but but she now knew it was a concession to his own desire for undisturbed solitude. She shut the door behind her, leaning against the cold wood, her body shaking. Her room was a masterpiece of luxurious confinement. A bed draped in pale silver silk, a vanity table laden with crystal bottles, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the manicured, moonlit palace gardens. The air was still and scentless. Kellen disliked strong perfumes. He preferred her to smell of nothing at all. He had slowly, methodically erased her. She walked to the window, staring out at the perfect geometry of the royal gardens. Box hedges trimmed into submission, roses pruned to flawless blooms, a fountain whose water flowed in a predictable, controlled arc. A perfect, beautiful prison. A cage is still a cage. A wave of nausea and fury washed over her. She turned from the window and her eyes fell on her reflection in the grand gilded mirror. A pale woman with haunted eyes stared back, draped in royal blue, a stranger wearing her face. She looked like a ghost. For years she had accepted this. She had let the bond, let Kellen convince her that this serene emptiness was peace. No more. A frantic energy seized her. She moved to her wardrobe, yanking open the doors. Inside hung row after row of exquisite gowns in shades of cream, silver, and ice blue, Kellen's preferred palette, colors of a winter queen. Her hands trembled as she pushed past them, searching for something, anything that felt like her. In the very back, crushed behind a heavy velvet winter cloak, she found it. A simple tunic and leggings of dark, forest green, clothes from her life before this, before him. She hadn't worn them in a decade. She tore off the silk gown, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. The rougher fabric of the old clothes against her skin was a shock, a comfort, a reminder. She felt less like a porcelain doll and more like a person. Her wolf, silent for so long, seemed to take a deeper breath. She had to get out. Not out of the palace, not yet, but out of this room, away from the sterile perfection. There was one place, a place he never went. The old solarium at the far end of the west wing. It had fallen into disrepair, its glass roof cracked and covered in vines, its exotic plants left to grow wild and untamed. It was the one part of the palace that felt alive. She slipped out of her room, a shadow in the darkened corridors. The castle was quiet, the guards at their posts, their gazes sliding over her without recognition. She was the queen, but dressed like this she was invisible. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. The air grew cooler, damper, as she neared the west wing. The scent of dust and decaying leaves replaced the sterile polish of the royal chambers. She pushed open the heavy creaking door to the solarium and stepped inside. The moonlight streamed through the grime-caked glass roof, silvering the riot of overgrown plants. It was a jungle in here, a world away from the controlled gardens outside. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, night-blooming jasmine, and something else, something wild, pine and wet stone. Her heart stopped. He was there. Ronan Rhymespire stood in the deepest shadows at the far end of the solarium, leaning against a stone pillar as if he had been carved from it. He was not looking at her, but up at the moon through a crack in the glass. He was so still, so much a part of the wildness of this place, that she hadn't sensed him until she was already inside. Fear warred with a strange, inexplicable pull. She should scream, she should run. He had threatened her mate, her king. He was the enemy, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. He turned his head slowly, and his golden eyes found her in the gloom. There was no surprise on his face, only a kind of weary inevitability. He didn't move toward her, didn't speak. He just watched her, his gaze intense enough to feel like a physical touch. "How did you get in here?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. "A king who builds his walls too high often forgets to guard the small forgotten doors," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration in the quiet space. He pushed off the pillar, taking a single, slow step into a patch of moonlight. The silver light caught the scars on his face, making them seem like ancient runes. "The question is, why did you come here?" I needed to breathe," she admitted, the truth of it aching in her chest. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. "He is suffocating you, with that bond. He uses it like a leash. She flinched at the bluntness of his words, but couldn't deny them. It is the bond of a mated pair. It is meant to ensure harmony. She was reciting a lesson she had been taught long ago, and the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Ronan took another step. The scent of the wild grew stronger, and her wolf, her poor starved wolf, lifted its head, whining low in her soul. It wanted to answer the call of his, to acknowledge the presence of a true, untamed alpha. Harmony, he scoffed, the sound soft but sharp. He demands silence and calls it harmony. He demands submission and calls it love. He was closer now, only a few feet away. He was huge, radiating a raw power that made the air around him hum. It was nothing like Kellen's cold, oppressive authority. This was a living, breathing power, like a thunderstorm contained in human form. I felt it in the hall. He was crushing you with it, forcing your calm. She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. He studied her, his gaze sweeping from her unbound hair to the simple green tunic. You do not look like a queen now. I do not feel like one, she whispered. He was so close she could see the flecks of darker gold in his eyes. He lifted a hand as if to touch her, then seemed to think better of it, letting it drop to his side. The restraint in the gesture spoke volumes. My sister Lyra, he said, his voice dropping, losing its hard edge and taking on a raw, grieving tone. She was like this place, wild, unwilling to be pruned and shaped. She believed the old ways, the true ways of the wolf, were being forgotten, that alphas like Kellen were building thrones on the bones of our freedom. He looked at Eden, his eyes boring into hers. She found something out. A secret about him, about his power. That is why he had her killed. Eden's heart hammered against her ribs. A secret? He is not what he seems, Ronan growled. His control, it is not natural. He took the final step, closing the space between them. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His touch was like lightning, a jolt of warmth and life that shot through her entire body. The bond with Kellen shrieked in protest, a distant, jealous alarm, but it was drowned out by the thunder in her own veins. Ronan's eyes narrowed, his focus sharpening on her face, on her eyes, on something deep within her he could apparently see. A strange, confused expression crossed his features. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her skin, and inhaled deeply, as if tasting her scent on the air. That's impossible, he breathed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. He looked at her as if seeing her for the very first time, as if he had just uncovered a truth buried for a decade. What? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What is it? He stared into her eyes, the molten gold of his gaze seeming to strip away every lie, every layer of shame, until he was looking directly at her soul. He told them all you were wolfless, Ronan whispered, his voice rough with a dawning terrible revelation. He lied. You are not empty. He leaned closer still, his lips almost brushing her ear as he delivered the final, world-shattering words. You're a wolf, a powerful one, and he has caged her. The words struck the air and shattered the silence. You're a wolf, a powerful one. For a disbelieving moment, Eden could only stare at him, her mind a maelstrom of denial. It was a cruel joke, a madman's fantasy. She had spent a decade mourning a part of herself that was gone, a connection she could never feel. She had built her entire identity around its absence. No, she breathed, the word fragile, brittle. She took a step back, shaking her head, the motion jerky and uncontrolled. You're wrong, I am wolfless. Everyone knows. The healers confirmed it years ago. I can't shift. I can't hear her. She isn't there. Ronan didn't argue. He simply watched her, his golden eyes filled with a profound, unshakable certainty that was more terrifying than any argument. The healers confirmed what the king told them to confirm. A lie repeated often enough becomes truth, especially when it comes from a throne. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his gaze fixed on her. I do not need a healer to tell me what I can scent on the air. It's faint, buried deep, like a spring that has been paved over with stone, but it's there, a scent of crushed wild herbs and summer lightning. It's the scent of your wolf. Her heart hammered a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. The bond with Kellen, which had been a low, anxious thrum, now pulsed with alarm. It was a cold, psychic wash, trying to douse the impossible spark of hope Ronan's words had ignited. He is lying. A savage trying to poison your mind. You are mine. You are safe in your silence. Why, she whispered, the question a plea. Why would Kellen lie about something like that? Power, Ronan answered, the word a low growl. Control. A king like him, who craves absolute order, cannot abide a wild thing at his side. A true alpha queen, with a wolf of her own, is a power in her own right. A partner, a challenge. He took another step closer, his presence a shield against the bond's chilling influence. He does not want a partner. He wants an ornament, a mirror that reflects his own perfection. Everything inside her screamed in protest, even as a deeper, buried part of her recognized the chilling truth. Kellen's obsession with control, his distaste for anything messy, emotional, or unpredictable, his gradual, systematic sanding away of her personality, until all that was left was a placid, agreeable surface. It had not been about making her a better queen. It had been about making her a better possession. The bond, she began, her voice trailing off. It should have told me. He has twisted it, Ronan said, his voice laced with a cold fury. A true mating bond is a bridge between two souls, a free exchange of strength and support. He has turned yours into a dam. He blocks what is yours, and I would wager he siphons your strength to bolster his own unnatural calm. He gestured around the wild, overgrown solarium. This is you, Eden, this untamed life. He has forced you to live in a pruned, manicured garden and told you it is for your own good, while he takes an axe to your roots. The metaphor was so sharp, so true, it stole her breath. She thought of her barrenness, the deep, abiding shame that had haunted her for years. The healers had offered theories, a flaw in her bloodline, an incompatibility, a divine cruelty. But what if it wasn't a flaw? What if the life-giving channel of the bond had been deliberately blocked, used for another purpose entirely? What if her wolf, the very essence of their kind's vitality, had been put to sleep, and her womb with it? The cold from Kellen's bond intensified, a desperate, suffocating wave of psychic pressure. Enough! This is nonsense. Come back to your chambers, you are confused. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The edges of the solarium swam, the moonlight blurring. She swayed, one hand flying to her temple. Instantly, Ronan was there. He didn't grab her, but his hands hovered near her arms, ready to steady her. His proximity was an anchor of heat and solid strength in a suddenly tilting world. Fight it, he commanded, his voice a low, urgent rumble. Do not let him pull you under. It is your mind, your soul, not his. I can't, she gasped, the pressure in her head becoming unbearable. It felt like two massive forces were pulling her apart. Ronan's shocking revelation on one side, and a decade of Kellen's placid, soul-crushing control on the other. You can, he insisted. He has made you forget your own strength. He did not destroy your wolf, Queen. He couldn't. He has only caged her. He's not caging a woman, Eden. He's caging a storm. His words, the raw belief in them, were a lifeline. She focused on his scent, pint stone and the clean smell of a coming rain, and used it to push back against the sterile nothingness Kellen was forcing upon her. She squeezed her eyes shut, and for the first time in years, she didn't try to calm herself. She reached inward, past the placid surface, past the layers of shame and acceptance, into the deep, silent darkness where her wolf was supposed to be. She expected to find nothing, an empty space, a hollow echo, but this time, guided by Ronan's impossible certainty, she felt something, a flicker, so faint it was like the ghost of a candle flame seen through a thick fog, a pinprick of warmth in a universe of cold. A tear escaped her closed eyelids and traced a hot path down her cheek. It was real, faint, dying, but real. Ronan must have seen the tear, seen the shift in her expression. He moved with a sudden, fierce gentleness. He placed his large, calloused hand flat against her chest, directly over her heart. His touch was not romantic. It was primal, elemental. It was an alpha's touch, meant to ground, to steady, to connect. The warmth of his palms soaked through the thin fabric of her tunic, a stark contrast to the icy grip of the bond. "There," he murmured, his voice resonating through her ribs. "Feel that? That is your heart. Now go deeper. Call to her. She is starving, Eden. She has been alone in the dark for 10 years. Call her home." She focused on the heat of his hand, using it as a beacon. She poured all of her desperation, her sudden fragile hope, into that silent internal space. "Are you there?" The thought was not words, but a wave of pure aching loneliness. "If you are there, please, answer me." For a moment, nothing. The cold from Kellen's bond surged again, a final, desperate attempt to reclaim control. But then, from that impossibly deep place, the flicker responded. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a shift. It was a feeling. A faint phantom echo of a growl, filled with a decade of sorrow, rage, and confusion. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever not heard. Her eyes flew open, wide and full of dawning, terrifying wonder. She looked at Ronan, and he saw it in her face. He saw the truth of it dawn. A slow, fierce smile touched his lips, transforming his scarred face. It was not a smile of triumph, but of profound relief. "There she is," he breathed. The moment was shattered by a sound from the far end of the corridor, the sharp metallic click of a guard's boot on stone. Then a voice, amplified by the echoing hallway. "My queen, are you in there? The king is looking for you." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She and Ronan sprang apart, the space between them suddenly crackling with the danger of their discovery. The warmth of his hand vanished, leaving a cold spot on her chest. "He knows you're not in your room," Ronan said, his voice dropping to a near-silent growl. His easy stillness was gone, replaced by the lethal alertness of a cornered predator. "He can feel your distress through the bond. He will be here himself in moments." "You have to go," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. If Kellen found him here with her, dressed like this, he would kill him. And what he would do to her would be far, far worse. Ronan looked toward the door, and then back at her. He was not afraid, but calculating. "I am not leaving you in this cage." "You must," she insisted, grabbing his arm. The muscle beneath his leather sleeve was hard as rock. "Go, please." The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by the murmur of more voices. They were coming for her. He held her gaze, his golden eyes blazing. He made his decision in an instant. He reached inside his tunic and pulled out a small, intricately carved object. It was a wolf, whittled from a piece of dark, fragrant wood, ironwood, from the heart of his territory. He pressed it into her hand. "Keep this," he commanded. "It's old magic. So long as you hold it, it will dampen his influence over the bond. It will give you a space to think, to find her again. It will not be enough to break it, but it will be a shield." Her fingers closed around the carving. It was still warm from his body, and it seemed to hum with a faint, steady energy. "How will I—" she started to ask, not even sure what the question was. "How will I see you again? How will I survive this?" "The northern wall of the palace garden," he said, his voice a rapid, low whisper. "At the edge of the woods, there is an old dead rowan tree struck by lightning. I will be there on the night of the new moon. 3 nights from now. If you want out of this cage, be there." The guards were at the solarium door. The heavy iron handle began to turn. Ronan gave her one last searing look. A look that promised retribution and revolution. Then he moved. He didn't run to a different door. He melted into the deepest shadows behind a tangle of enormous, overgrown ferns, becoming one with the darkness as if he were born of it. One moment he was there, a solid, breathing mountain of a man. The next, he was simply gone. The door swung open. 2 royal guards stood silhouetted against the torchlight of the hall, their spears held at attention. Behind them, his face a mask of controlled concern, was Kellen. His eyes swept the solarium, taking in the wild disarray before they landed on her. On her unbound hair, her common tunic, her bare feet on the cold stone floor. A flicker of profound displeasure crossed his face before it was smoothed away into perfect, husbandly worry. "Eden, my love," he said, his voice like silk sliding over steel. He strode toward her, his immaculate boots silent on the flagstones. "We were so worried. What are you doing out here? You'll catch a chill." She stood frozen, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. Her hand was clenched around the ironwood wolf in her pocket, its faint warmth a secret anchor. She had to smile. She had to be calm. She had to lie. Kellen reached her, placing his hands on her shoulders. His touch was cold, even through the fabric. The bond clamped down, and she felt his psychic senses probing, searching for the source of her agitation. She focused on the memory of his dismissal in their chambers, the coldness in his eyes. It was easy now to show him only fear and confusion. I had a nightmare," she said, her voice a plausible imitation of a frightened woman. "I couldn't breathe. I came here for air." His eyes narrowed, searching her face for any hint of deceit. He could feel the turmoil, but he was misinterpreting its source. He saw her dishevelment, her trembling, and drew the conclusion he wanted to draw, that the barbarian's outburst had unsettled his fragile, delicate mate. "It is all right," he murmured, pulling her into a stiff, formal embrace. His arms were the bars of her cage closing around her again. "The savage is gone. He will not trouble you again. I will see to it." He stroked her hair, his movements a pantomime of affection. The bond washed over her, a tide of forced serenity, but this time, because of the small wooden wolf pressed against her hip, it didn't quite reach her core. A small, defiant part of her remained untouched, clear-headed, and terrified. As he led her from the solarium, back toward the gilded silence of their rooms, she risked a single glance back into the overgrown darkness. There was nothing there but shadows and moonlight, but she knew. He had been real. The feeling of her wolf had been real, and in 3 nights, under the darkness of the new moon, she had a choice to make: the cage or the wild. The next 3 days were a masterclass in deception. Eden moved through the gilded halls of her life like a ghost, her face a serene mask, her every action a lie. Kellen, believing her properly chastised and frightened back into submission, resumed his usual cool, possessive distance. He watched her, of course. His winter sky eyes would follow her across a room, and through the bond, she felt his periodic, probing assessments, cold, clinical checks on her emotional state. But the ironwood wolf, tucked into a hidden pocket sewn inside her chemise, did its work. It was a small, secret shield. The bond still connected them. She still felt the suffocating weight of his expectations, but it was muffled, as if she were hearing him through a thick stone wall. It no longer drowned her. For the first time in a decade, there was a quiet space inside her head that was entirely her own. In that space, she nurtured the flicker. She spoke to her wolf, not with words, but with feelings. With memories she had long suppressed. The scent of damp earth after a rainstorm, the thrill of running barefoot through the grass as a child, the sheer, exhilarating joy of a full moon on an open field. She sent these feelings into the deep, dark place inside her, offerings to a starving prisoner. And the flicker grew. It was no longer a dying ember. It was a small, determined flame, weak but steady, warming a part of her soul that had been frozen for years. With the warmth came sensation. She began to notice things with a startling, painful clarity. The cloying, artificial scent of the hothouse flowers in the palace vases made her faintly nauseous. The incessant, polite murmur of the court ladies grated on her ears. The weight of the silken jewels she was forced to wear felt like a physical burden, heavy and suffocating. Her senses, long dulled by the bond's sterile influence, were waking up, and they found the palace wanting. The morning of the 3rd day, the day of the new moon, Kellen summoned her to his private study. It was a cold, austere room, lined with bookshelves filled with treaties and histories. Not a single personal item adorned the space. It was the heart of his power, and it was as soulless as he was. He was standing by the large barred window, staring out training grounds where guards drilled with brutal precision. He didn't turn when she entered. "The reports from the Rhymespire border are troubling," he said without preamble, his voice flat. "The savage has been rallying his people. There are whispers of war." Eden's heart gave a painful lurch. She gripped the wooden wolf through the fabric of her dress, its solid shape a reassurance. "War? Because of his sister?" He uses his sister as an excuse, Kellen corrected, finally turning to face her. His eyes were like chips of ice. He has always coveted our lands, our order. He is a creature of chaos, and chaos resents control. He is trying to fracture the territories, to turn the other alphas against me with his lies. He walked toward her, his movements smooth and deliberate. He stopped before her, his gaze sweeping over her face, searching. His accusations against me, they have not lingered in your mind, have they, Eden? The question was a test. The bond pulsed, a familiar pressure demanding the correct answer. No, my king, I believe only in you. She looked him in the eye, her expression one of perfect, placid loyalty. He is a grieving man lashing out in pain. His words were madness, they are forgotten. For a moment he seemed satisfied. A faint, almost imperceptible relaxing of the muscles around his mouth, but then his eyes narrowed again. Good, because loyalty must be absolute. There is no room for doubt in this palace. There is no room for secrets. His gaze was so intense, so penetrating, she felt a sliver of pure terror. Did he know? Could he sense the ironwood token? Could he hear the whisper of her reawakening wolf? He reached out and tucked a stray strand of her hair behind her ear. His fingers were cold. We will be holding a ritual tonight. A binding of loyalty. The court will assemble in the old heart tree grove. A reaffirmation of vows to show the territories that we are united. That the king and his queen are one, unshakable. You will stand by my side. Her blood ran cold. The heart tree grove, tonight. The night of the new moon. The night she was supposed to meet Ronan. It wasn't a coincidence. He was suspicious. This was a trap. The ritual was a public display of her allegiance, a gilded chain he meant to fasten around her neck in front of the entire court. Of course, Kellen, she murmured, her voice a perfect imitation of gentle obedience. He gave her a thin, satisfied smile and turned back to the window, dismissing her. Wear the silver gown, the one with the pearls, it reflects the moonlight. She backed out of the room, her mind racing. The plan was impossible now. The entire court would be in the grove, which bordered the northern woods. Security would be tighter than ever. There was no way she could slip away to the dead rowan tree. Ronan would wait for her, and she would not come. He would think her a coward. He would think he had been wrong about her. The fragile flame inside her flickered with despair. The hours leading up to the ritual were agonizing. Her ladies-in-waiting chattered as they dressed her, their voices a meaningless drone. They laced her into the silver gown, a dress as beautiful and confining as a shroud. They wove pearls into her hair, each one feeling like a small, cold stone. As she stared at her reflection in the mirror, she saw Kellen's queen, a pale, perfect doll ready for display. But for the first time, she also saw the desperate, terrified wolf in her eyes. When the time came, Kellen collected her. He took her arm, his grip possessive, and led her through the torchlit corridors to the great doors that opened onto the palace grounds. The court was already assembled, a river of dark silks and glittering jewels flowing toward the ancient grove. The night was moonless, as promised. The sky a vast, star-dusted blanket of black velvet. The heart tree was a colossal ancient oak that had stood for centuries, its branches like gnarled arms reaching for the heavens. The air in the grove was thick with the scent of old wood, damp earth, and the sacred herbs the pack elders were burning in silver braziers. It was a place of deep magic, a place where bonds were forged and destinies sealed. Tonight, it felt like a place of execution. Kellen led her to the base of the tree, to a low, flat stone altar. They stood together, facing the assembled alphas and nobles. He raised his hands for silence, and a hush fell over the grove. Brothers, sisters, his voice rang out, clear and commanding. We gather on this dark moon to remember that our bonds are what give us light. In the face of threats from the wild, from those who would see our unity crumble, we stand together. We are one pack, under one Alpha King. His eyes swept the crowd, then came to rest on Eden. He took her hand, his cold fingers lacing with hers. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of pure political theater. And at my side, my queen, my mate, the heart of my kingdom, a symbol of our peace, our stability. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze a steel trap. Through the bond, unfiltered now by his public duties. She felt the raw command. Show them you are mine. He produced a small silver ritual knife. Its blade gleamed in the torchlight. A reaffirmation, he announced to the crowd. A drop of blood from the Alpha, a drop from his Luna, mingled on the heartstone to show that our lifeblood is one. He pricked his own thumb without flinching, a single perfect crimson bead welling up. He held the knife out to her. Her hand trembled as she took it. This was the final seal. To complete this ritual would be to publicly and magically recommit herself to the lie, to the cage. It would be an act of betrayal against her own reawakening soul. She looked from the knife to Kellen's expectant face, then out at the sea of watching nobles. She saw their faces, rapt and obedient. And beyond them, at the edge of the torchlight where the grove met the deep dark woods, she saw a flicker of movement, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. For a heart-stopping second, she thought it was him, Ronan, but it wasn't. It was a wolf, a massive gray wolf, its fur brindled with black. It stood just at the tree line, utterly silent, watching the proceedings with an unnerving intelligence. No one else seemed to have noticed it. Then she felt it, a faint external pressure against her mind. Not the cold clamp of Kellen's bond, but something else. A questioning nudge, a whisper without words. Are you coming? Her breath caught in her throat. It was a mind link, faint and strained by distance, but undeniable. And it was coming from the direction of the woods. Ronan was out there, beyond the gray wolf, waiting. He was calling to her. She looked at Kellen, at the silver knife in her shaking hand. The choice was now, not in an hour, not tomorrow, now. The cage or the wild, the lie or the terrifying unknown truth. The tiny flame of her own wolf, which had been cowering in fear, suddenly roared to life. It was a surge of pure, defiant instinct. It screamed a single, silent word in her soul. Go, her heart slammed against her ribs. She had no plan, no weapon, no hope of escape. But she knew she could not prick her finger, she could not complete the ritual. She took a deep breath, the scent of the wild woods calling to her, drowning out the cloying smell of the ritual herbs. She looked Kellen in the eye, and for the first time, she did not try to hide the wolf she saw reflected there. She let him see the defiance. She let him see the stranger she was becoming. A flicker of surprise, then cold, murderous fury crossed his face as he realized what she was about to do. She did not run. She did not scream. She did the one thing he would never expect. She raised the silver knife, and in one swift, shocking motion, she sliced it not across her own thumb, but across the back of Kellen's hand that was still holding hers. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Kellen stared in stunned disbelief at the shallow, bleeding line she had carved into his skin. It was not a deep wound, but it was an unthinkable act. An act of rebellion, an act of treason. You, he breathed, his voice a low, venomous hiss. She didn't wait for him to finish. She ripped her hand from his, turned, and ran. She plunged into the crowd of stunned nobles, shoving past them, ignoring their cries of shock and outrage. She ran for the woods. She ran for the shadow where the gray wolf had been standing. Seize her! Kellen's roar of pure fury echoed through the grove. Do not let her escape. Hands grabbed at her, tearing at the silver silk of her gown. She stumbled, her heel catching on a root, and fell to her knees. A guard loomed over her, his spear leveled at her chest. For a moment, she thought it was over. Then the world exploded into motion. The gray wolf she had seen shot out of the darkness like a missile, a blur of fur and teeth. It slammed into the guard, sending him flying with a sickening crunch of bone. The wolf stood over her, hackles raised, a deep rumbling growl tearing from its throat, keeping the other guards at bay. From the woods behind the wolf, a figure emerged, Ronan. He was not dressed in court leathers, but in the dark, practical gear of a warrior. In his hand he held not a sword, but a massive gnarled ironwood staff. His golden eyes met hers across the chaos. There was no "I told you so" in his gaze, only a fierce, burning pride. He raised his staff and slammed it into the ground. A shockwave of sound, a deep, resonant boom, rolled through the grove. He gave a sharp, guttural cry, an alpha's command that was pure, untamed wolf, and the woods answered. From the darkness, more wolves emerged. Not dozens, but scores. Shadowfen warriors in their shifted form, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. They poured into the grove, a silent, disciplined tide of gray, black, and brindle fur, forming a living wall between Eden and Kellen's stunned guards. Ronan strode through the line of his wolves, his gaze never leaving Eden. He reached her, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the king screaming for his head. He held out his hand. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice a low rumble above the din. She took his hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. He pulled her to her feet, his body a solid shield at her back. She looked from his fierce, proud face to the wall of wolves holding back the entire royal court. Then she looked back at Kellen, whose handsome face was contorted into a mask of pure, murderous hatred. She had not just run from her cage, she had shattered it. And in doing so, she had just started a war. The forest swallowed them whole. One moment, Eden was in the torchlit chaos of the grove. The next, she was plunged into a world of profound, breathing darkness. Ronan's hand was a vice around hers, pulling her along in his wake. The ground was uneven, a treacherous tangle of roots and fallen leaves, but he moved with the unnerving, silent certainty of a creature born to this domain. Around them, the Shadowfen wolves flowed like a river of ghosts, their paws making almost no sound on the forest floor. Her heart was a wild drum against her ribs. The silver silk of her gown, now torn and mud-stained, snagged on every branch, a ridiculous remnant of a life that had ceased to exist the moment her knife had touched Kellen's skin. The pearls in her hair caught on low-hanging branches, and she felt them scatter behind her like discarded tears. She was shedding the queen, piece by painful piece. They ran for what felt like an eternity, the shouts and horn blasts from the palace guards growing fainter and fainter, until they were finally consumed by the immense silence of the rimspire. Only when the air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp moss did Ronan finally slow, pulling her into the shelter of a massive granite overhang. The wolves materialized from the darkness, their panting breaths misting in the cool night air. The large gray wolf that had saved her trotted to Ronan's side, nudging his hand with its nose. Ronan placed a hand on the wolf's head, his expression softening. "Well done, Jorund," he murmured, his voice rough with praise. The wolf gave a low woof of acknowledgement before turning its intelligent eyes to Eden. There was a clear, assessing quality in its gaze, but no malice. Eden leaned against the cold stone, trying to catch her breath, her body trembling with adrenaline and shock. The reality of what she had done was crashing down on her. She had attacked the Alpha King. She had fled with his greatest rival. She was a traitor, an exile. "Are you hurt?" Ronan's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He was crouched in front of her, his golden eyes scanning her for injuries. His gaze caught on the scratches on her arms from the branches, the mud on her ruined dress. She shook her head, unable to speak. He reached out and gently, with surprising dexterity, untangled a thorny vine that had caught in her hair. His fingers brushed her neck, and a jolt, entirely different from the bond's cold pressure, shot through her. It was warmth. It was life. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice a low, fierce rumble. "To do that in front of them all, you have the heart of a wolf, even if you've forgotten how to use her teeth." His words, meant as a compliment, sent a fresh wave of despair through her. "But what have I done?" she whispered, the enormity of it finally finding voice. "I started a war. Your people. They will die because of me." "My people have been dying for years," Ronan corrected, his expression hardening. "In small, secret ways, a patrol that doesn't return, a hunter found with a silver arrow in his back. Kellen has been waging a quiet war on anyone who doesn't bend to his perfect, sterile order. You didn't start this war, Queen. You just made it loud." He stood up, turning to his wolves. He gave a series of low, guttural commands, a language of clicks and growls that Eden's human ears couldn't comprehend, but that the awakening wolf inside her stirred to, recognizing its ancient rhythm. The wolves dispersed, melting back into the shadows to form a protective perimeter. When he turned back to her, he was holding a water skin and a dark woolen cloak. "Here, drink, and get out of that ridiculous dress. It's a target." She took the water skin with trembling hands, the cool water a balm to her parched throat. The act of shrugging off the heavy cloak he offered and struggling out of the silver gown felt like a final, monumental act of severing. The silk rustled to the ground, a pale, shimmering puddle in the darkness, the last vestige of Queen Eden. She pulled the rough, heavy wool around her shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke, pine, and him. It was the most comforting thing she had felt in a decade. "The bond," she said, her voice muffled by the cloak. "He will use it to find me. He will know where I am." Ronan shook his head. "Not here. This is the heart of my territory. The old magic runs deep in the soil. It will cloud his senses, interfere with the signal." He tapped his temple. "But he will be trying. I can feel the pressure of it at the edges of my mind. Like a distant storm. He is raging." Just the thought of Kellen's cold, calculated rage made her flinch. She thought of the look on his face in the grove, the pure, murderous shock. He wasn't just angry at her betrayal. His perfect world, his flawless image, had been shattered in front of everyone. His humiliation would demand a terrible price. "What was the secret?" she asked, pulling the cloak tighter. "The one your sister died for. You said he's not what he seems." Ronan's face became a mask of stone. He stared out into the darkness of his forest for a long moment before answering. Lyra was a truth-seer, a rare gift. She could sense the nature of a wolf's power, its source. She attended court a year ago, disguised as a handmaiden. It was the only time she ever went near that gilded cage. She came back, terrified. He turned to look at Eden, his eyes burning with a cold, ancient anger. The mating bond, the bond an alpha has with his pack. It is a living thing, a flow of energy, loyalty, and strength that moves both ways. The alpha gives protection, the pack gives strength. It is a sacred balance. But Kellen's bond... Lyra said it was a one-way street. He paced the small space under the overhang, his movements agitated like a caged wolf. He doesn't just receive loyalty, he takes it, he drains it. Lyra said his core, the source of his alpha power, felt hollow, artificial, like a vessel that constantly needs to be filled. He uses the bonds, with his pack, and most of all, with you, to drain their energy, their vitality, and feed his own. It's why his control is so absolute. It's why his people are so placid. They are being bled dry, psychically, and they don't even know it. The blood drained from Eden's face. It was a monstrous parasitic truth, but it explained everything. His unnatural calm, the court's blind obedience, her own decade-long descent into listless, barren emptiness. He had been feeding on her. He had leached the life from her wolf, from her body, to sustain his own flawless facade. The bond wasn't a connection, it was a siphon. "And your wolf," Ronan continued, his voice soft now, full of a grim understanding. "A powerful wolf like the one I sent on you. That would be too much for him to control, a rival power source at the very heart of his web. He couldn't risk you ever learning to use it, so he didn't just cage her, he put her into a coma and attached a feeding tube." A wave of violation so profound washed over her that her knees buckled. She slid down the rock wall to the ground, wrapping her arms around her stomach. It felt as if her entire life, her entire body, had been a lie, a resource for him to exploit. Ronan was instantly before her again, kneeling in the dirt. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a solid grounding force. "Eden, look at me." She lifted her head, her eyes blurred with tears of rage and grief. "This is not your shame," he said, his voice iron. "It is his monstrosity. He did this to you, but he did not break you. That spark, the one you felt in the solarium, that is the part of you he could never touch. That is your truth. And now you are free to reclaim it." "How?" she choked out. "I don't know how. I can barely feel her." "You will," he promised. "Here, away from him, in the heart of the wild. She will wake up, but it will not be easy. You have 10 years of his poison to purge from your system, and he will not let you go willingly." He glanced back in the direction of the palace, a grim set to his jaw. "The severing of a true bond can kill a wolf, but what he has made with you, it is not a true bond, it's a parasite, and the only way to deal with a parasite is to cut it out." The words hung between them, brutal and necessary. To be truly free, she would have to face Kellen. She would have to find a way to break the twisted connection that had defined her existence. A wolf emerged from the trees, giving a low growl to get Ronan's attention. He listened, then nodded. My scouts report Kellen's hunters are already massing at the border. They have trackers. They will not be able to follow us through the deep woods, but they will not stop. He will burn this forest to the ground to get you back. He stood and held out his hand to her again. We must keep moving. We have a long journey to the heart of my territory, to a place called Stone Hollow. It is a sanctuary, a place where Kellen's power cannot reach. There you will be safe. There you can begin to heal. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. The path ahead was terrifying, an unknown wilderness fraught with danger, but for the first time in her adult life, it was her own. They walked for hours, deeper and deeper into the forest, the wolves a silent, moving guard around them. The moonless dark was absolute, but Ronan navigated it as if it were broad daylight. He taught her how to place her feet, how to listen to the whisper of the wind in the pines, how to smell the difference between fox and deer on the air. He was reintroducing her to a world her senses had been forced to forget. As the first faint hint of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, they stopped in a small, hidden dale beside a clear, running stream. The wolves drank, their forms still shrouded in shadow. Eden knelt by the water's edge, splashing the icy liquid on her face. She looked at her reflection. A pale, wide-eyed stranger stared back, her face smudged with dirt, her hair a wild tangle. There was no sign of the queen, and for the first time, she was glad. A strange sensation prickled at the back of her neck, a feeling of being watched, but not by the wolves. She looked up, scanning the trees on the far side of the stream. There was nothing, and yet. The feeling persisted. Suddenly, a sharp, stabbing pain lanced through her head, so intense it made her cry out and clutch her temples. It was him. It was Kellen. He had broken through the forest interference. There you are. The voice was not a sound, but a cold, venomous thought injected directly into her mind. It was his voice, stripped of all its silken courtesy, full of pure, possessive rage. Did you think you could hide from me, little traitor? The bond, which had been a dull pressure, became a searing chain, tightening around her soul. He was pulling, trying to pinpoint her location, trying to drag her back under his control. You are mine, the voice seethed in her mind. You belong to me. I will find you. I will drag you back to the palace in chains, and I will teach you the meaning of obedience. Ronan was at her side in an instant, his hands on her shoulders. Eden, fight him, don't let him in. But the assault was too strong, too sudden. She gasped, her vision turning gray at the edges. The small flame of her wolf flickered violently, threatening to be extinguished by the sheer force of his will. She could feel him mapping her location, feeling the trees, the stream, the very air around her. He was locking on. Ronan swore, a low, vicious sound. He knelt behind her, pulling her back against his chest, creating a physical and psychic barrier. He wrapped one arm around her torso, holding her steady, and pressed the palm of his other hand to her forehead. Listen to my voice, he commanded, his own thoughts a low, powerful rumble that pushed back against Kellen's intrusion. Focus on me, breathe, Eden. He is feeding on your fear. Do not give it to him. She tried, but Kellen's mental grip was too strong. The pain was unbearable. She was losing. Then Ronan did something desperate. He lowered his head, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as he spoke, his voice a low primal growl that resonated through her entire being. Your wolf. Call her, not with a whisper, with a roar. She is not his to command. She is yours. Claim her. His words, his proximity, the sheer, raw alpha power radiating from him, was a jolt to her system. He was right. Kellen was a parasite, and she was letting him win. A surge of pure, defiant rage, hotter and more powerful than anything she had ever felt, erupted from the core of her being. She stopped fighting his psychic pull and did the opposite. She opened the gates. She let all of her rage, her sense of betrayal, her grief for her stolen life, flow down the bond toward him. And deep inside her, she screamed her wolf's name, a name she hadn't known she knew until this very moment. A wave of incandescent power, raw and untamed, erupted from her. The world went white. The sound in her ears was not a scream, but the shattering of 1,000 panes of glass. A psychic shockwave blasted outward, severing Kellen's connection with a violent final snap. In her mind, she heard him cry out, a sound of pure shock and pain before he was gone. The bond, the constant oppressive weight that had defined her for a decade, vanished. The silence left in its wake was the most terrifying, most liberating thing she had ever known. She collapsed backward, boneless, into Ronan's arms, gasping for air as if she had just broken the surface after a lifetime underwater. The world slowly swam back into focus. The wolves were staring at her, their ears flattened, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. Ronan was holding her, his own breath ragged. He looked down at her, his golden eyes wide with shock. He slowly lifted his hand from her forehead. On his palm, where it had touched her skin, a faint silver light was glowing, tracing the outline of a crescent moon. It pulsed once, twice, then faded. "By the ancestors," he breathed, his voice full of disbelief. "What are you?" Before she could answer, before she could even process what had just happened, a new sensation flooded her, a feeling of two heartbeats inside her chest, a second consciousness, waking from a long, long sleep. "We are awake," a voice whispered in her soul. It was a voice made of shadow and moonlight, of fury and freedom, and it was her own. The silence in her mind was a vast, open country. For the first time in 10 years, there was no hum, no pressure, no cold, placid weight telling her who to be. There was only the whisper of the wind, the rush of the stream, and the steady, powerful thrum of a second heartbeat within her. The rhythm of her own awakened wolf. "We are awake." The voice was a revelation. It wasn't an intrusion like Kellen's had been. It was a resonance, a harmony. It was the missing half of her own soul speaking to her at last. A wave of profound, dizzying relief washed over Eden, so powerful she felt lightheaded. She was whole. She had been broken, hollowed out, and now she was gloriously, terrifyingly whole. Ronan eased his hold on her, his expression a mixture of shock and reverence. He stared at the spot on his palm where the silver crescent moon had glowed. "That was not the breaking of a bond," he said, his voice hushed. "That was the shattering of a cage, the power that came from you. I have never felt anything like it." Eden pushed herself into a sitting position, her own hands trembling. She felt different. The world seemed sharper, the colors more vivid. The scent of the damp earth was a rich, complex perfume. She could feel the steady life force of the ancient trees around them, and she could sense the individual heartbeats of every wolf in the clearing, each one a distinct, familiar rhythm. Her senses had been pried open. "I heard her," she whispered, looking at Ronan, her eyes wide with the miracle of it. "For the first time, I heard my wolf. And the voice resonated within her, warm and fiercely protective." Ronan's stern, scarred face broke into a slow, genuine smile. It transformed him, chasing the shadows from his features. "Welcome back," he said, the words directed not just at Eden, but at the wolf within. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time she felt seen not as a fragile queen or a broken victim, but as an equal. A power, the gray wolf Joran patted forward and nudged her hand, whining softly. Tentatively, she reached out and buried her fingers in the thick fur of his ruff. The contact was electric. It wasn't just the feel of fur. She could feel the wolf's essence, his unwavering loyalty to Ronan, his cautious curiosity about her, the deep, steady calm of his spirit. It was a new language, one she was suddenly, miraculously fluent in. "He is pack protector," her wolf supplied. "His heart is rock steady. He is glad we are free." She was so overwhelmed with the flood of new sensations, the joy of this reunion with herself, that it took a moment for the other implications to sink in. "Kellen," she breathed, the name a shard of ice in the newfound warmth. He felt that. He felt the bond break. Ronan's smile vanished, his expression turning grim. He did more than feel it. What you didn't just sever his connection, you sent a backlash of pure, raw power down the line. You wounded him, not just his pride. You wounded his spirit. "Good," Eden said, and the ferocity in her own voice startled her. The wolf within purred in agreement. "He is a thief. Thieves should be made to bleed." "It is good," Ronan agreed, "but a wounded predator is the most dangerous kind. He knows his control over you is gone. He knows you have a power he can't comprehend." He will no longer be content to drag you back in chains. Now he will want you destroyed. The cold reality of his words settled over the small Dale. Her freedom had been bought at the price of an all-out war, with her as its epicenter. She was no longer just a runaway queen. She was a threat to Kellen's very existence, the living proof of his monstrous lie. Stone Hollow is no longer just a sanctuary, Ronan said, his voice low and urgent. It is our only hope. We must get there before his hunters can regroup and track the psychic echo of what you just did. He turned to his wolves, a silent command passing between them. Instantly they were on their feet, alert and ready. The journey changed. Before they had moved with stealth. Now they moved with a desperate, ground-eating urgency. Ronan set a relentless pace, and Eden, to her own astonishment, kept up. A new strength flowed through her limbs, a stamina she hadn't known she possessed. It was the wolf's strength, a deep well of energy she could now draw upon. The forest, which had been a menacing tangle, now felt like an ally. She could feel the paths before she saw them, sense the hidden streams, the sturdy footholds, the clearings where they could run. As they traveled, she communed with her wolf. It was a dizzying, exhilarating experience. 10 years of silence were broken by a flood of sensation, memory, and instinct. Her wolf showed her images, not of the palace, but of the life before. A wild, free childhood Eden had forced herself to forget. She felt the ghost sensation of wind in her fur, the pull of the moon on her bones, the fierce, joyful ache in her muscles after a long run. He tried to erase us, the wolf said, her thoughts a low, angry growl. He built his marble cage around our soul and told us it was the world. He will not do it again, Eden promised. The vow a solid thing in her heart. They stopped only once, as the sun reached its zenith, to drink from a spring and chew on strips of dried meat Ronan produced from his pack. As she ate, Ronan watched her, his expression unreadable. You are different, he stated. The fear is gone from your eyes. He took more than my wolf, she replied, meeting his gaze. He took my fearlessness. I'm just taking it back. He nodded, a flicker of deep respect in his golden eyes. You will need it. Stone Hollow is not just a place. It is a trial. The valley is protected by the spirits of the old alphas. They do not grant sanctuary to just anyone. You must prove you are worthy of their protection. Prove myself? How? You must face the echoes, he said, his voice grim. When a great wolf dies in the valley, a fragment of their spirit remains, bound to the stones. They are memories with teeth. They will test you. They will show you your deepest fears, your most painful memories. They will try to break you. If your will is strong enough to withstand them, the valley will accept you. If not— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They reached the entrance to Stone Hollow as dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky. It was not a valley in the traditional sense, but a massive natural fortress, a deep circular basin carved into the heart of a mountain. The only entrance was a narrow, winding canyon, its walls sheer and smooth as glass. Two colossal monoliths, like ancient silent sentinels, flanked the entrance. The air at the mouth of the canyon was heavy, thick with an unseen power. It hummed against Eden's skin. Her wolf paced nervously inside her. This is an old place, a deep place. Power sleeps in the rock here. Ronan stopped, placing a hand on one of the monoliths. This is as far as I can take you, he said, his voice grave. The trial must be faced alone. My pack will remain here, to guard the entrance against Kellen's hunters. He turned to her, his gaze intense. Whatever you see in there, whatever you feel, know that it is not real. It is a shadow. Your spirit is the only thing that is real. Hold on to it. Eden's heart pounded. She looked into the dark, narrow passage. It was like staring into a throat. What if I'm not strong enough? He reached out and gripped her shoulder, his hand warm and firm. You stood before a king and a court, and you chose freedom. You shattered a bond that had been strangling you for a decade. You are the strongest person I have ever met. He squeezed her shoulder once, a gesture of profound faith. Now go, claim your sanctuary. She took a deep breath, nodded, and stepped across the threshold between the two monoliths. The moment she entered the canyon, the air changed. The sounds of the forest behind her vanished. replaced by an absolute ringing silence. The temperature dropped. The rock walls seemed to press in on her, whispering with voices too faint to understand. This was a place outside of time. She walked deeper, her footsteps echoing unnaturally. The passage twisted and turned, and soon the entrance was lost to sight. She was utterly alone. Then the whispers grew louder. They swirled around her, coalescing into a single, terrifyingly familiar voice. Disappointment. Eden froze. It was her father's voice. He had been a proud, stern alpha, who had died years before her mating. He had doted on her. His only child. His heir. A shimmering form began to coalesce from the shadows in front of her. It was him. Not a memory, but a perfect, translucent replica. His face etched with a look of profound sorrow and contempt. "I gave you to a king," the echo of her father said, his voice dripping with spectral disappointment. "I secured for you a life of honor, of power, and you threw it away. For what? To run into the woods with a savage like a common rogue." The words were a physical blow. Her deepest, most buried insecurity, that she had failed her lineage, her father's memory. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He was a monster." "He was a king," the echo boomed, its form swelling. "And you were his queen. Your duty was to the pack, to the territories. Your duty was to be strong, but you were always weak. Soft, a wolfless failure?" The last words pierced her. Wolfless failure, the brand she had worn for a decade. "He is a lie," her wolf snarled in her mind. "A ghost made of your fear. He is not our father. Banish him." Eden clenched her fists, drawing strength from the fire in her wolf's voice. "No," she said, her own voice gaining strength. "I was not wolfless. I was caged. And I was not weak. I survived." She looked the echo in the eye. "My father would have been proud of my survival. You are just a shadow. You have no power over me." She strode forward, walking directly toward the apparition. For a moment, it loomed over her, its face a mask of rage. But as she passed through it, its form dissolved like smoke, its final whispered curse fading into nothing. She was shaking, but she was unharmed. She kept walking. The canyon opened into a vast circular chamber, open to the star-dusted sky. The walls were lined with caves, and in the center stood a single, ancient, silver-barked weirwood tree, its leaves the color of blood. This was the heart of Stone Hollow, but she was not alone. Another figure stood beneath the tree. Kellen. He looked exactly as he had in the grove, his handsome face perfect, his silver gown immaculate. But this was not the real Kellen. His form shimmered, and his eyes were hollow pits of shadow. Another echo, the most dangerous one of all. "My love," the echo of Kellen said, his voice the silken trap she knew so well. "You are lost, confused. That savage has poisoned your mind. Come back to me. All will be forgiven." He held out a hand, his smile gentle, persuasive. For a horrifying moment, a part of her, the part that had been conditioned for a decade, wanted to believe him. The part that craved safety, that was terrified of the war she had started. "I know you are scared," he continued, his voice seeping into the cracks in her resolve. "But this life of dirt and running, it is not for you. You are a queen. Your place is on a throne, at my side." "He lies," her wolf warned. A low, constant growl. "Remember the cold. Remember the silence." Eden remembered. She remembered the endless empty dinners, the cold hand on her back, the crushing weight of his control. She remembered the slow, methodical erasure of her soul. "You are right," she said, her voice clear and steady in the echoing chamber. "I am a queen." The echo smiled, believing he had won. "But my throne is not beside you," she continued, taking a step toward him. The fire of her wolf was burning in her chest, hot and bright. "You did not want a queen. You wanted a battery, a beautiful, silent source of power to feed your own hollow heart." The echo's smile faltered. The gentle facade began to crack. "I am not lost," Eden declared, her voice ringing with a power she had never known she possessed. "I am found. You did not cage a woman, Kellen. You caged a wolf, and my teeth are my own." She felt a change happening within her, a deep cellular shift she had only dreamed of. An agonizing, exquisite pain tore through her body as bones reshaped, muscles bunched and reformed. It was not a choice. It was a declaration, an answer to the echo's challenge. She fell to her knees, a cry torn from her throat that was half human, half howl. Fur, the color of moonlight and silver, sprouted along her arms, her back. Her senses exploded. The world became a symphony of scent and sound. The Kellen echo stared, its handsome face contorting in spectral shock and fury as she rose, no longer on 2 feet, but on 4 powerful paws. She was larger than she had imagined, her fur a brilliant silver that seemed to glow in the starlight, her eyes the same burning gold as Ronan's. She lifted her head and let out a howl, a sound not of pain or fear, but of pure, triumphant, earth-shaking freedom. The howl struck the echo like a physical blow. It shrieked, its form flickering violently, the illusion of Kellen burning away to reveal a swirling vortex of shadow and malice. This was the true test, not the lies, but the raw fear it represented. The silver wolf, who was Eden, did not hesitate. She charged. She met the shadow head-on, her jaws snapping not at an illusion, but at the fear itself. She tore into it, her howl echoing off the ancient stones, a queen claiming her kingdom, not of silk and gold, but of tooth and claw and spirit. The chamber filled with the light of her silver fur and the sound of her righteous, beautiful rage. The wind that swept through Stone Hollow carried the scent of victory. It was a clean scent, sharp with pine and cold stone, and cleansed of the cloying perfume of the past. 3 full moons had passed since the war had ended, since the day Kellen Brooks, the Hollow King, had fallen on the blood-soaked training grounds outside his own palace. His end had not been swift. It had come after his legions were broken, after his carefully constructed alliances had crumbled in the face of the truth Eden and Ronan had spread through the territories. It had come when he stood alone, his parasitic power shattered, his body a frail vessel against the tide of wolves he had wronged. Eden stood on the high ledge overlooking the valley, the place she had first faced the echoes. The silver weirwood tree below was draped in the first delicate blossoms of spring, its blood-red leaves a stark, beautiful contrast to the pale flowers. She was not wearing a crown of pearls, but a simple circlet of woven leather and raven feathers Ronan had made for her. The moonlight caught the silver streaks in her dark hair, a permanent mark of her wolf's awakening, a scar she wore with pride. She was not the same woman who had fled the palace. The queen of porcelain was gone, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. In her place stood the Alpha of Stone Hollow. Her spirit, once a flickering ember, now burned with a steady, confident flame. She had not just reclaimed her wolf. She had become her. The 2 halves of her soul were so perfectly intertwined that there was no longer a distinction between Eden and the silver wolf. They were one. A familiar, heavy tread sounded on the stone behind her. She didn't need to turn. The scent of him was as much a part of her as the air she breathed. "The scouts have returned from the Sunwood lands," Ronan said, his voice a low rumble as he came to stand beside her. He was no longer just the Alpha of Shadowfen. He was the chosen leader of the new Northern Coalition, a council of Alphas dedicated to the old ways he and Eden had fought to restore. The weight of his new duties had settled on him, carving new lines of responsibility into his scarred face, but it had not diminished the wildness in his eyes. "Brises sends word. The last of Kellen's loyalists have surrendered. It's over, truly over." Eden leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. His arm came around her, a familiar, solid weight. Theirs was not a bond like the one she had shared with Kellen, a psychic chain of control and submission. It was a bond forged in battle and respect, a quiet, unspoken understanding that ran deeper than any magic. They were 2 sovereign powers, choosing to stand together. "It's hard to believe," she murmured, looking out at the peaceful valley. The caves in the rock walls were now lit with the warm, gentle glow of cook fires. Laughter, the sound of children playing, drifted up from below. Stone Hollow was no longer just a sanctuary. It had become a home for the displaced, the wronged, the wolves who had been broken by Kellen's reign and were now healing in the valley's embrace. "You gave them this," Ronan said, his thumb stroking her arm. "You gave them hope." She had done more than that. In the final battle, when Kellen, in a last desperate act, had tried to turn his draining power on his own men to fuel himself, Eden had faced him. She had met his psychic assault not with a defensive wall, but with an open channel. She had shown them all what he was, forcing every wolf on the battlefield to feel his parasitic nature, to feel the life being leached from them. And then she had offered them a different kind of bond, a bond of sanctuary, a promise of freedom. One by one, his soldiers had lowered their weapons, severed their loyalty to the Hollow King, and turned their eyes to the Silver Queen, who offered them not servitude but a choice. Kellen had been left utterly alone, a king with no subjects, a parasite with no host. His power had consumed itself, leaving him a withered, pathetic figure. Ronan had been the one to deliver the final, merciful strike, but it was Eden who had truly defeated him. She had destroyed his power by showing his people the truth. "We did it together," she corrected, turning to look up at him. The moonlight softened the hard lines of his face, making the gold of his eyes gleam. "I would still be a ghost in a cage if you hadn't walked into that hall. And I would be a king of shadows and grief, ruling a pack bent on vengeance," he countered. "You taught us there was something more to fight for than just survival." He cupped her face, his calloused hands gentle against her skin. "You taught us how to heal." His head dipped, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not the desperate, frantic claiming of a battle won, but the slow, deep kiss of a hard-won peace. It tasted of the wild, of home, of a future she had never dared to imagine. "He is our anchor," her wolf murmured contentedly in her mind. "His heart is mountain stone. Our heart is the running river. Together we make a home." They stood there for a long time, watching the stars wheel across the immense, dark sky. The past was a landscape of scars, and Eden knew they would always carry them. Kellen's reign was a wound on the soul of the territories that would take generations to fully fade. There would be more challenges, more disputes, more hardships to face as they tried to rebuild what he had broken. But for the first time, the future felt like an open country, a territory to be explored, not a cage to be endured. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who believed a bond meant safety, who had shrunk herself to nothing in the hopes of being loved. She felt a pang of sorrow for that woman, for her silent, lonely suffering. But she was no longer her. That night she had dreamed. It was not a dream of fear or of fighting. She had dreamt she was running, her powerful silver paws eating up the miles under a full, brilliant moon. Ronan was running at her side, a great black wolf, his presence a steady, joyful rhythm next to her own. They were not running from anything. They were running toward the horizon, their howls a song of freedom that echoed off the mountains and shook the very stars from the sky. She squeezed Ronan's hand, her gaze fixed on the quiet, hopeful lights of the valley below. The scars Kellen had left on her soul were not gone. They were simply a part of her now, like the silver in her hair, a reminder not of what she had lost, but of the battle she had won. She had trusted a bond and been broken by it. But she had trusted herself, her own wild, untamable heart, and in doing so she had become a queen forged not in a palace, but in ruin. And that was a kingdom that could never be taken from her. The wind picked up, a cool, clean promise of a new day, and Eden breathed it in, free.